Yo, what's going on everybody? Today is Wednesday, August 26th. Welcome, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking about the new PPP Forgiveness interim final ruling that was released just yesterday. And basically what these things are is they just provide more guidance for rules and interpretations of the rules and stuff like that. And there have been many of these that have been released. And basically what they do is they just provide guidance on more specific matters. Because we know like general rules for PPP forgiveness, right? Sometimes there are specific things that we don't know, like how things are handled. So that's what these interim final rulings are for. And the new one just got released yesterday, and I just wanted to share with you what was covered in that ruling. All right, so the first thing that was covered was owner-employee compensation. Now, as you know, if you are an owner-employee of your company, you are limited to the amount of payroll or owner compensation that you can pay yourself and have it forgiven. So if you elect the 8-week covered period, then your maximum owner compensation or payroll forgiveness is limited to $15,385. If you elect the 24-week covered period, that number jumps to $20,833. So what that means is you, as an owner of your company, can only pay yourself up to $20,833 and have that forgiven. If you pay yourself more than that, then only $20,833 is forgiven. Does that make sense? Regular employees are not limited to any of those numbers. And that kind of makes sense because if you have a 24-week covered period and you pay them for 24 weeks, their pay can easily exceed that number, right? So what the Department of Treasury did is they released this interim final ruling that states more specifically which owner employees are covered under that rule and which are not. Here it states that if you're an owner employee of a C or S corporation that owns less than 5% of the interest in that corporation, then you don't have to be limited by the owner employee compensation rule. You can be treated as a regular employee in terms of the amount of salary forgiveness that you can apply for. All right. So that's kind of a big deal. That might be more applicable to larger companies, but it's still a big deal. It provides more clarity over the situation, just because they deem that if you own less than 5%, then you don't have any real authority or real influence over the company because of your minority holder. And I think that's why they're allowing employees that own less than 5% to not be limited by that rule. The next topic that this ruling covers is related to mortgage and rent payments and leasing and subleasing with tenants. So the question in the ruling asks, if you use non-payroll expenses such as rent and mortgage interest as part of your forgiveness calculation, can you still apply for forgiveness if you have tenants or subtenants? So the answer is yes, you can, but it's limited by the amount of money you make from your tenants or subtenants. For example, if you pay $10,000 a month in rent, but let's say you sublease part of your office to somebody else and they pay you $2,500, that means that only $7,500 can be forgiven because you're making money on the other $2,500. This is the first example that they include in the ruling, so I'm not making this shit up, all right? The next example relates to mortgage interest. So let's say you own a building. You own a building and it's 75% occupied, 25% vacant. And the 75% that occupies it is paying you rent as a regular tenant. The amount that you can get forgiven is 25% of your mortgage interest during the covered period. And that's because the other 75%, you're making money on rent. Basically, the Department of Treasury is saying that you don't deserve to have that forgiven because you're making money on that portion of your mortgage. So the portion that you have vacant will be forgivable. All right, so the last thing that this ruling covers still relates to rent and mortgage interest, but it relates to related parties. So the question is, can rent payments made to a related party be forgivable? And if you don't know what a related party is, I'll explain to you in a second. But the answer is yes, it can be forgivable with limitations. What is a related party? A related party is this. Let's say you as a person, you own building A and you have a company, LLC B, And let's say LLC B rents space out of building A, owned by you. Because these two entities are transacting business together and you are the majority owner of both entities, then they are considered a related party. So let's say LLC B receives the PPP and they claim rent payments as a forgivable expense on their PPP forgiveness application. Well, the rent payments are made to building A, which is also owned by you. So the question is, can those rent payments be forgivable? And the answer is yes, it can be forgivable, but you are limited to the amount of mortgage interest that building A paid during the covered period. So it's limited just to the mortgage interest. You can't get the full rent that you paid forgiven. And I think they do this because they don't want you cheating the system using, creative accounting and creative bookkeeping to get more rents forgiven. An example here, okay? Here's an example. Let's say building A, during the covered period, paid $5,000 in mortgage interest, while LLC B paid $20,000 of rent to building A, okay? So if you didn't own building A, and building A was owned by somebody else, then the $20,000 of rent could be used to apply for forgiveness in total. But since you do own building A, then that $20,000 is limited to the mortgage interest that you paid on building A, which is $5,000. So only $5,000 can be forgivable. And in the ruling, it states that you must include like mortgage interest in statements or mortgage payment statements in order to prove the amount of interest that you paid on the building. In this ruling, those are the only three things that were covered. It was a short ruling, but albeit very important ruling for people who have buildings and companies, or for people who own like property that rent out that property to tenants. Hopefully that clears up some things for you guys. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns in the comments below. And of course, if you're new here, please do subscribe to my channel. I will try to give you as much clear, updated information as possible. And if you haven't done so already, I would love it if you smash that like button. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care for now and stay safe.